In a small town nestled in the mountains, where dense fog is a constant presence, a local legend about a half-man, half-ape creature comes terrifyingly to life. A family on vacation finds themselves trapped in a nightmare, as what should have been a peaceful retreat turns into a desperate fight for survival against an implacable and mysterious predator. The thick fog snaked between the ancient trees, swallowing the last rays of the setting sun. The Mendez family's Range Rover wound along the winding road, its headlights barely penetrating the white shroud surrounding them. In the passenger seat, Marina clutched the map in her trembling hands, her nervous eyes alternating between the paper and the almost invisible road ahead. "Are you sure it's this way, Rodrigo?" she asked, her voice betraying growing anxiety. Rodrigo, with his hands gripping the wheel, nodded stiffly. "It must be. The GPS lost signal miles ago, but the old man at the convenience store said to just follow this road." In the back seat, 12-year-old twins Lucas and Julia had abandoned their useless cell phones. No signal in this end of the world, and were now pressing their faces against the fogged-up windows, their wide eyes trying to decipher the shadows dancing in the growing darkness. "Dad," Julia whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "Did you see that?" "What, dear?" Rodrigo replied, his eyes not daring to leave the road. I don't know. It looked big and hairy, like a..." She hesitated. "Like a giant ape." Lucas let out a nervous laugh. "Don't be silly, Ju. There are no giant apes here." But Lucas's words sounded hollow, swallowed by the fog that now seemed to infiltrate the car itself, bringing a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Marina turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Kids, remember what the hotel receptionist told us about the local legend, the Ape-Man. It's probably just your imagination playing tricks on you because of those silly stories." But as the words left her lips, a shiver ran down her spine. Why had they chosen to spend their vacation in this remote place, after all? The promise of peace and tranquility now seemed like a sinister omen. The car continued to move slowly, the fog thickening with every meter, and then, without warning, it appeared before them, a clearing in the dense forest, and in its center, a dark wooden cabin, its windows like empty eyes staring into the night. Rodrigo turned off the engine, and the silence that followed was oppressive. There was no sound of crickets or the rustle of leaves in the wind, only a sepulchral silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "Well," he said, his voice sounding strangely loud in the silence, "we're here." As the family disembarked, hurriedly collecting their bags, no one noticed the massive shadow moving at the edge of the forest, or the yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness, watching their every move with a primitive and insatiable hunger. The Mendez's vacation was about to turn into a nightmare from which they might never wake up. Morning arrived slowly at the Mendez's cabin, the persistent fog filtering the sunlight and transforming it into a diffuse, unsettling glow. Determined not to let the strange atmosphere ruin their vacation, the family decided to explore the nearby small town in search of supplies and perhaps a bit of normalcy. The town's narrow, winding streets seemed almost deserted when they arrived. Old shops with faded facades lined the cracked sidewalks, their dusty windows displaying items that seemed forgotten by time. It was in the local grocery store that the first whispers reached their ears. As Marina and Rodrigo selected fruit, the elderly proprietor, a man with a wrinkled face and sharp eyes, approached. "You must be the new guests at the Silvera cabin, right?" he asked, his voice gravelly. Rodrigo nodded, surprised. "Yes. How did..." "Few outsiders come here," the old man interrupted, his eyes narrowing, "especially to that cabin." Marina stepped closer, curiosity and apprehension mixing in her gaze. "Why do you say that?" The old man looked around as if fearing being overheard before leaning closer. Have you heard of the Ape-Man, Lucas and Julia, who were nearby, moved closer, their eyes wide with excitement and fear. It's just a local legend, right? Marina laughed nervously, but her laughter died when she saw the old man's grim expression. Legend, he murmured. Ask Doña Ermelinda about her missing husband, or young Carlos about the claw marks on his cattle. Legends don't leave 40-centimeter footprints in the mud, or rip doors off their hinges as if they were paper. A heavy silence fell over the group. It was Julia who finally broke it, her voice trembling slightly. Have you seen this thing? The old man fixed his gaze on her, and for a moment it seemed he was reliving some terrible memory. Child, he said slowly, pray you never do. Those eyes, those yellow eyes full of hunger and malice, they're not something you forget. At that moment, a loud crash from the back of the store made everyone jump. The old man straightened quickly. Probably just the cat knocking something over, he muttered, but his eyes betrayed his nervousness. You should get back to the cabin before nightfall and lock the doors and windows tightly. As the Mendez family left the grocery store, the weight of the old man's words seemed to settle on their shoulders. The fog, which had previously been just an inconvenience, now seemed to hide threats in every shadow. On the way back to the cabin, they passed other townspeople. Some stared at them with a mix of pity and fear. Others quickly looked away. The buzz of conversation ceased as they approached, only to resume in urgent whispers as they moved away. Back in the car, Marina tried to maintain her composure. It's just a story to scare tourists, she said, but her voice trembled slightly. Rodrigo nodded, trying to sound confident. Of course, every small town has its legends. But as they drove back to the cabin through the increasingly dense fog, none of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched. And in the depths of the forest something was moving, something large, something patient, something hungry. Night was falling, and with it, the real terror was just beginning to awaken. The afternoon dragged on slowly as the Mendez family returned to the cabin. The fog, which had momentarily dissipated, began to thicken again, swallowing the trees one by one. The Range Rover snaked along the narrow road, its headlights barely penetrating the oppressive whiteness. Finally, the cabin appeared before them, a dark silhouette against the grey sky. Seen in daylight, its rustic appearance, which had once seemed charming, now emanated an aura of abandonment and isolation. Rodrigo parked the car, and they all disembarked in silence, the weight of the stories heard in town hanging over them. Marina was the first to break the silence. Come on, everyone. Let's not let some silly stories ruin our vacation, okay? But her voice sounded forced, even to her own ears. As they entered the cabin, the creaking floorboards seemed to echo in the unnatural quiet of the forest. Lucas and Julia, normally chatty, were unusually silent, their eyes scanning every shadowy corner. Rodrigo went to check the generator at the back of the property, while Marina began putting away the groceries. The twins, feeling the tension in the air, decided to explore the interior of the cabin. Upstairs, Julia opened the door to one of the bedrooms and froze. "Lucas," she called, her voice a trembling whisper. "Come see this." Lucas approached, and his eyes widened. On the wall opposite the window were deep marks, as if giant claws had torn through the wood. It must be a bear, Lucas tried to rationalize, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Below they heard Rodrigo's voice. "Marina, did you see this?" The twins rushed down the stairs to find their parents on the back porch. Rodrigo was pointing at something on the edge of the forest. "There," he said, his voice tense. "Something's moving between the trees." For a moment, they all stood in silence, watching. At first they saw nothing but fog and the shadows of trees, but then, For an instant something moved, something large, something that shouldn't be there. Marina swallowed hard. It must be a deer or a moose. But they all knew it wasn't true. Whatever it was too big, moving too wrong, to be any animal they knew. The sun began to set, painting the sky in bloody hues that barely penetrated the fog. Darkness was approaching quickly, bringing with it a sense of vulnerability that made everyone's skin crawl. "Let's go inside," Rodrigo said finally, his voice low and tense, "and let's lock everything." As the family retreated into the cabin, the distant sound of breaking branches echoed through the forest. Something was moving out there, something that didn't fear the darkness. In fact, the darkness was its domain. Night fell over the cabin like a suffocating shroud. Inside, the Mendez family huddled in the living room, the lights on, trying to maintain an appearance of normalcy, but their eyes constantly returned to the windows, where the darkness pressed against the glass like a living entity. And somewhere out there, in the fog-shrouded forest, something watched them, something patient, something hungry, something that knew they would eventually have to sleep. The long night of terror was just beginning. The night dragged on, dense and oppressive. The Mendez family had retired to their rooms, but sleep was elusive, disturbed by strange noises and unsettling shadows. Around 3 a.m, a sharp, prolonged sound cut through the silence. Julia sat up in bed, her heart pounding against her ribs. It wasn't a wolf's howl or a nightbird's cry. It was something different, something that made her blood run cold. "Lucas," she whispered, shaking her brother. "Did you hear that?" Lucas, his eyes wide in the darkness, just nodded. The sound came again, closer this time. It was as if someone, or something, was dragging metal claws against the bark of the trees. In the next room, Rodrigo and Marina were also awake, exchanging tense glances. "It must be the wind," Rodrigo murmured, but his voice betrayed his uncertainty. A dull thud on the porch made everyone freeze. Heavy footsteps, unlike any animal they knew, echoed on the wooden boards. Rodrigo rose silently, grabbing the baseball bat he had brought for safety. With Marina close behind, he made his way to the front window, slightly parting the curtain. The fog had cleared a bit, allowing the full moonlight to illuminate the clearing. And there, at the edge of the forest, something moved. It was a massive, hunched, hairy figure. For a moment it stood still, as if sniffing the air. Then slowly it turned towards the cabin. Marina stifled a scream. 2 yellow eyes gleamed in the darkness, fixed on the window where they stood. The couple retreated, their minds struggling to process what they had seen. "It can't be real," Marina stammered. Before Rodrigo could respond, another sound filled the air, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The twins appeared in the doorway, pale with fear. "Dad?" Lucas called, his voice trembling. "Stay here," Rodrigo ordered, his voice firmer than he felt. "I'll check outside." "No!" Marina grabbed his arm. "It's too dangerous." But Rodrigo knew they needed to be sure. With his heart pounding, he headed for the front door, the bat held tightly in his sweaty hands. Slowly he turned the knob and opened a crack. The cold night air rushed in, carrying with it a wild, acrid odor. The porch was empty, but something caught his attention. There on the wooden boards were deep marks, 4 parallel grooves that could only have been made by enormous claws. Rodrigo quickly shut the door, locking it with trembling hands. "What is it?" Marina asked, her face a mask of fear. He swallowed hard before answering, "We need to get out of here, now." But as the family hurriedly gathered their belongings, a terrifying howl tore through the night. It was a sound that mixed animal fury with something almost human. Outside, branches snapped and leaves rustled. Whatever that creature was, it was no longer hiding. The hunt had begun. Panic gripped the Mendez family as they ran through the cabin, throwing clothes and belongings into open bags. The sound of breaking branches and heavy footsteps was rapidly approaching. "Hurry, kids!" Marina shouted, her voice shaking with fear. "Grab only the essentials." Rodrigo, still holding the baseball bat, ran to the front window. His heart nearly stopped when he saw the scene outside. The creature was at the edge of the clearing, its monstrous form partially hidden by shadows, but there was no mistaking its presence. It was enormous, easily over 2 meters tall, covered in dark, matted fur. Its yellow eyes glowed with a cruel intelligence and a primitive hunger. "My God," Rodrigo murmured, backing away. At that moment, a deafening crash reverberated through the cabin. The back door shook on its hinges as something massive threw itself against it. Julia screamed, dropping the backpack she was holding. Lucas pulled her close, both of them trembling uncontrollably. "To the basement," Rodrigo shouted, remembering the trapdoor they had discovered earlier. "Now!" The family barely had time to reach the trapdoor when the back door gave way with a horrible crack. The sound of claws scraping against the wooden floor filled the house, followed by a guttural growl that made everyone's blood run cold. Rodrigo pushed Marina and the kids toward the basement stairs. "Go! I'll follow you!" As the family hurried down the creaky steps, Rodrigo stayed behind, the bat raised, ready to face whatever came. The creature appeared in the kitchen doorway, its monstrous silhouette filling the frame. For a moment it stood still, its yellow eyes fixed on Rodrigo. Then, with a roar that seemed to come from the depths of hell, it charged. Rodrigo swung the bat with all his might, hitting the creature's furry arm. The impact reverberated up his arms, almost making him drop the improvised weapon. The creature howled in pain and fury, retreating momentarily. Taking the chance, Rodrigo launched himself toward the trapdoor, jumping the last few steps. Marina helped him close and lock the heavy wooden door, just in time to hear the creature's claws furiously scratching from the other side. In the dark basement, illuminated only by the faint light of their cell phones, the Mendez family huddled together, trembling. The sound of the creature's heavy footsteps echoed above them, accompanied by growls and the sound of furniture being destroyed. "What are we going to do?" Marina whispered, tears streaming down her face. Rodrigo, still holding the bat tightly, looked at his terrified family. He knew they were cornered, that the creature above would not give up easily, but he also knew he had to be strong for them. "We're going to survive," he said, his voice firm despite the fear. "We'll find a way out of here." But as the words left his lips, a new sound joined the chaos above, the sound of claws starting to scratch the basement door. The creature had found them. The fight for survival had only just begun, and the night was still long. The dark, damp basement of the cabin had become the last refuge for the Mendez family. The sound of claws scratching the trapdoor was incessant, sending shivers of terror down everyone's spine. Rodrigo, his face covered in sweat, quickly surveyed the space around him. His eyes fell on a small casement window near the ceiling. It was narrow, but it might be their only chance to escape. "Marina," he whispered, "grab that old shelf. We're going to use it to reinforce the door." While Marina and the kids dragged the heavy wooden shelf, Rodrigo searched the basement for something he could use as a weapon. In a dusty corner, he found an old rusty shovel and a lumberjack's axe. "Lucas," the father called, handing the shovel to his son. "If that thing gets in, use this. Aim for the head." The boy nodded, pale but determined. Julia, trembling, grabbed a piece of pipe. "And me, Dad?" Rodrigo hesitated for a moment, then said, "You stay by the window. If I say run, you go first. Understand?" The girl nodded, swallowing hard. Marina, finishing pushing the shelf against the door, turned to her husband. "And now?" Rodrigo took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. "Now we plan our escape." He pointed to the small window. "It's our only way out. But we have to be fast and silent. That thing has keen hearing." "And then?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling slightly. "The car," Rodrigo replied. "It's about 20 meters from the cabin, if we can get to it." A deafening crash interrupted his thoughts. The creature had thrown itself against the door with all its might. The wood groaned, but the shelf held, for now. "We don't have much time," Marina whispered, fear evident in her eyes. Rodrigo nodded, his mind racing. "We need a distraction, something to draw the creature's attention while we escape." His eyes scanned the basement. Landing on an old battery-powered radio, an idea began to form in his mind. "Marina, grab those paint cans. Lucas, find something flammable. We're going to make a smoke bomb." While the family worked feverishly, mixing chemicals found in the basement, the attack upstairs continued. Each impact made the door tremble, and small splinters of wood began to fall. Finally, Rodrigo held an improvised volatile mixture in a paint can. "This should create a dense smoke screen. When I say, Julia opens the window. I'll throw this outside and turn the radio to full volume. As soon as the smoke rises, we run to the car." Marina looked at her husband, admiration and fear mingling in her eyes. "Be careful." Rodrigo kissed her forehead. "We will survive this." With the plan set, the family positioned themselves, Julia by the window, ready to open it. Lucas and Marina, holding their makeshift weapons, stood behind Rodrigo. The next crash was even more intense. The door was barely holding. "Now!" Rodrigo shouted. Julia opened the window, and Rodrigo threw the paint can outside. He turned the radio on, the volume at maximum, and tossed it after the can. Almost instantly, thick smoke began to rise, and the sounds of static and music filled the night. "Go!" Rodrigo ordered. Julia went through the window first, followed by Lucas. Marina and Rodrigo climbed out last, helping each other. The smoke was dense, obscuring their vision, but they could hear the creature growling in confusion. Taking advantage of the distraction, the family ran towards the car, their hearts pounding with fear and hope. They reached the car, Rodrigo quickly unlocking the doors. Everyone piled in, and Marina started the engine. The vehicle roared to life, and they sped away, leaving the fog-shrouded cabin and the monstrous creature behind. As they drove away, Rodrigo looked back, seeing the cabin disappearing into the mist. They had survived this night, but he knew the terror was far from over. The scars of this encounter would remain with them forever. As the Mendez family drove away from the cabin, the dense fog seemed to follow them, clinging to the car like a living entity. The sounds of the night were drowned out by the engine's roar and the family's heavy breathing. "Is it gone?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling. Rodrigo, constantly looking in the rear-view mirror, shook his head. "I don't know, but we can't stop." Marina kept her eyes on the road, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. "We need to find help, but there's no signal out here. We have to reach the town." The dense fog made the drive treacherous. Every shadow seemed to shift and move, and the family's nerves were stretched thin. The occasional rustling in the trees added to their paranoia. After what felt like hours, they saw lights ahead, a small diner, a beacon in the darkness. Marina pulled into the parking lot, and they quickly ran inside, the bell above the door jingling as they entered. The diner was almost empty, with only a few late-night patrons and a tired-looking waitress. They all turned to look at the disheveled family. "Please, we need help," Rodrigo said, his voice urgent. "There's something out there." The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, approached them. "Calm down, honey. What happened?" Rodrigo quickly recounted their encounter, the creature, The attack. The patrons listened in silence, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concern. "That sounds like the old legend," one of the patrons, an elderly man, said. "The Ape-Man. Thought it was just a story to scare kids." "It's real," Marina insisted. "We saw it. It talked to us." The waitress nodded, understanding the urgency. "I'll call the sheriff. He needs to know about this." As she made the call, the family huddled together, trying to catch their breath. Lucas and Julia clung to their parents, their eyes wide with fear. "It'll be okay," Rodrigo said, more to reassure himself than them. "We'll get through this." After a few tense minutes, the door opened, and the sheriff walked in, accompanied by a deputy. "What's this about a monster?" he asked, his tone skeptical. Rodrigo stepped forward. "It's not a joke. There's something out there, and it's dangerous." The sheriff studied the family, then nodded. "All right, let's go check it out. Deputy, you stay here with the family." As Rodrigo and the sheriff headed back to the cabin, the fog seemed to thicken again. The drive was silent, both men lost in their thoughts. When they reached the clearing, the cabin stood eerily silent, the air still heavy with the scent of smoke and fear. The sheriff got out, his flashlight cutting through the fog. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Rodrigo followed, the baseball bat still in his hand. The two men approached the cabin cautiously, their footsteps crunching on the gravel. Inside, the damage was extensive. Furniture was overturned. Claw marks marred the walls, and the basement door was nearly destroyed. The sheriff's expression grew grim as he took in the scene. "Looks like you weren't lying," he muttered. "But where is it now?" As if on cue, a low growl echoed through the cabin. The two men turned to see the creature standing in the doorway, its yellow eyes glowing with malice. "Get back!" the sheriff shouted, drawing his gun. The creature lunged, and Rodrigo swung the bat, connecting with its arm. The sheriff fired, the bullets hitting the creature's chest, but it barely slowed down. "We need to get out of here," Rodrigo yelled. They ran back to the car, the creature hot on their heels. The sheriff managed to get inside and start the engine just as the creature slammed into the side, rocking the vehicle. Rodrigo climbed into the passenger seat, and they sped away, the creature's growls fading into the distance. Back at the diner, the deputy had gathered more people, and they were preparing to head to the cabin. When the sheriff and Rodrigo arrived, they quickly shared what had happened. "We need to organize a hunt," the sheriff said. "That thing is too dangerous to leave out there." The townspeople, though frightened, agreed. They gathered weapons and flashlights, preparing for a long night. Rodrigo, exhausted but determined, joined them. "We have to end this, for my family." The group set out into the foggy night, their resolve strengthening with every step. The creature was out there, and they wouldn't rest until it was stopped. The hunt was on. The fog, thick and oppressive, clung to the search party as they moved through the forest. The air was filled with the sound of crunching leaves, snapping twigs, and the occasional murmured conversation. Rodrigo led the group, his baseball bat in hand, his mind replaying every detail of the creature's attack. He knew they had to be careful. The creature was intelligent and incredibly dangerous. The sheriff's voice broke through his thoughts. "Spread out. Keep your eyes open and stay in pairs." Rodrigo paired up with the sheriff, their flashlights piercing the darkness. The tension was palpable, every shadow a potential threat. Suddenly, a scream pierced the night. The group converged on the sound, finding one of the townspeople, a young man, staring in horror at something on the ground. It was a set of massive footprints leading deeper into the forest. The sheriff knelt to examine them. "These are fresh. It's close." They followed the tracks, their hearts pounding in their chests. The forest seemed to close in around them, the fog making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Then they saw it, The creature stood in a clearing, its back to them. It seemed to be examining something on the ground. Rodrigo and the sheriff moved closer, their weapons at the ready. The creature turned, its yellow eyes locking onto them. For a moment time stood still. Then, with a roar, it charged. The group scattered, the creature's massive form barreling through the trees. Rodrigo swung his bat, connecting with the creature's side. It howled in pain, but didn't slow down. Gunshots rang out as the sheriff and the others fired, trying to bring the beast down, but the creature was relentless, swatting at its attackers with deadly precision. Rodrigo found himself face to face with the creature again. He swung his bat, hitting its arm. The creature roared and backhanded him, sending him flying. Dazed, Rodrigo struggled to his feet. He saw the sheriff grappling with the creature, trying to keep it away from the others. Rodrigo knew they had to end this now. Grabbing a fallen branch, he charged the creature, aiming for its head. The impact was solid, and the creature staggered. The sheriff took the opportunity to fire point-blank into its chest. With a final ear-splitting roar, the creature collapsed. The forest fell silent, the fog seeming to lift slightly, as if the creature's death had broken its hold. The group gathered around, their faces a mix of relief and exhaustion. The creature lay motionless, its yellow eyes staring blankly at the sky. "What the hell was that thing?" one of the townspeople muttered. Rodrigo shook his head. "I don't know, but it's over." The sheriff nodded, his expression grim. "Let's get back. We need to report this and make sure there are no more of these things out there." As they made their way back to the diner, the weight of what they'd just experienced began to sink in. The creature, the hunt, the revelation of its existence, it was all too much to process. But for now, they were safe, and that was enough. The Range Rover roared down the narrow, winding road, its headlights barely piercing the dense fog that seemed to swallow everything ahead. Marina gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. Rodrigo, still panting, kept glancing at the rearview mirror, fearing the monstrous form of the ape-man might appear at any moment. "What happened back there?" Marina's voice trembled. "We saw you talking to that thing." Rodrigo swallowed hard, the revelation still echoing in his mind. It spoke to me. "Marina, it's not a legend. It's real, an experiment, something we humans created." A heavy silence fell over the car. In the back seat, Lucas and Julia exchanged terrified glances. Suddenly, a deafening thud shook the vehicle. Something had hit the roof. "He caught up to us!" Julia screamed. Marina floored the accelerator, the engine roaring in protest. The sound of claws scraping metal echoed inside the car, making everyone shrink in fear. "There!" Lucas pointed ahead. "A fork in the road." Marina swerved sharply left, sending the car skidding in the mud. For a moment it seemed like they would flip over, but she managed to regain control. The maneuver was enough to dislodge the creature from the roof. Rodrigo looked in the rear-view mirror just in time to see the ape-man rolling on the road before disappearing into the fog. "It won't take long for it to catch up again," Rodrigo said, his mind racing. "We need a plan." "What about the police?" Lucas suggested, his voice trembling. Marina shook her head. "No cell signal out here. And even if we had one, who would believe us?" The road ahead narrowed even more, tree branches scraping against the sides of the car like bony fingers trying to grasp them. "Dad," Julia whispered, "what does it want?" Rodrigo closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the creature's words. "Revenge, freedom, and hunger." A chilling howl cut through the night, seemingly coming from all directions at once. The creature was closing in again. "There," Rodrigo pointed. "That side road. It looks like it leads to some kind of compound." Marina swerved sharply, the tires skidding on loose dirt. As they drove on, dark shapes began to emerge in the fog. Abandoned buildings, rusted fences, faded warning signs. "Oh my God," Marina gasped. "It's an abandoned military facility." As the car moved through the ghostly complex, realization hit Rodrigo like a punch to the gut. "This is it," he murmured. "This is where it came from. The lab, the experiments." A new impact rocked the car. This time the creature appeared at the passenger window, its yellow eyes glowing with murderous fury. "Marina, look out!" Rodrigo shouted. But it was too late. The ape-man's claws tore into the front tire, sending the car spinning out of control. The world became a blur of motion and terror as the vehicle flipped over, rolling several times before finally coming to a stop. Upside down against the wall of one of the abandoned buildings. For a moment everything was silent. Then, the sound of twisted metal being ripped open echoed through the night. The last thing Rodrigo saw before losing consciousness was the monstrous form of the ape-man leaning over them, its eyes gleaming with a mix of triumph and hunger. The escape was over. Now, it was time for the final confrontation. Consciousness slowly returned to Rodrigo, bringing a wave of sharp pain. He blinked, trying to focus his blurry vision. The world was upside down. No, the car was overturned. "Marina? Kids?" he called out, his voice hoarse. A faint groan came from the driver's seat. Marina was alive but injured. In the back, Lucas was struggling with his seatbelt, while Julia lay motionless, blood trickling from her forehead. The sound of tearing metal made Rodrigo turn. The ape-man was ripping off the driver's door like it was paper. "Get out!" Rodrigo shouted, wrestling with his own seatbelt. "Run!" With one final pull, the door gave way. The creature tossed it aside and reached into the car with its massive hand. In pure desperation, Rodrigo kicked the creature's hand. The ape-man recoiled, roaring in pain and surprise. Seizing the moment, Rodrigo freed himself. He crawled out of the car, ignoring the searing pain in his ribs. "Come on," he yelled to his family, helping Marina out. Lucas managed to drag Julia out, the girl finally regaining consciousness. The ape-man recovered quickly, advancing once more, its yellow eyes blazing with inhuman fury. "Run to the building," Rodrigo ordered, grabbing a piece of twisted metal from the car as an improvised weapon. The family hesitated for a moment. "Go!" he screamed. "I'll follow you." As Marina led the kids toward the dark entrance of the abandoned building, Rodrigo faced the creature. "This ends here," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. The ape-man paused, tilting its head. "You don't understand," it growled. "This never ends." With inhuman speed, the creature lunged. Rodrigo barely had time to raise his makeshift weapon before he was struck. He flew through the air, crashing painfully against the building's wall. As he struggled to get up, he noticed something that made his heart stop. A faded sign on the wall read, "Hybrid Project, Restricted Access." In that moment, everything clicked. The legends, the experiments, the horror they had unleashed. The ape-man advanced slowly, savoring the moment. "You're right," Rodrigo said, coughing up blood. "It was us, humans. We created you." The creature paused, surprised. "But we can also end this," Rodrigo continued, his eyes frantically searching for something, anything he could use. His gaze fell on an electrical panel on the wall, sparks flying from exposed wires. The ape-man roared, preparing for the final strike. At that moment, Rodrigo did the only thing he could. He ran toward the creature, catching it off guard. At the last second, he threw himself to the side, causing the ape-man to crash into the electrical panel. A blinding flash lit up the night, followed by an agonizing scream that seemed to come from another world. the air filled with the smell of burning flesh and singed fur. When the light faded, Rodrigo saw the creature's motionless form on the ground, smoke rising from its body. Trembling, he cautiously approached. The creature's eyes opened one last time, locking onto Rodrigo's. "Freedom," the ape-man whispered, before the light in its eyes faded forever. Rodrigo collapsed to his knees, exhausted and in shock. The nightmare was over, but he knew the consequences of this horror were just beginning. Slowly, he got to his feet and staggered toward the building where his family was hiding. As dawn began to break on the horizon, Rodrigo knew they would carry the scars of this night forever, and somewhere deep in the forest other dark secrets still waited to be uncovered. Weeks had passed since that fateful night in the foggy forest. The Mendez family had returned to city life, but the scars of their ordeal were far from healed. The deafening silence. Rodrigo spent hours on the porch, lost in thought. The ape-man's final words, "freedom," echoed in his mind. The guilt gnawed at him, despite not being directly involved in the creature's creation. Marina, on the other hand, had become a shadow of her former self, gripped by panic at the slightest sound in the night. The children in trauma. Once lively and talkative, Lucas and Julia now spent most of their time in silence. Julia suffered from recurring nightmares, waking up screaming about glowing yellow eyes in her room. Lucas became obsessed with conspiracy theories and genetic experiments, scouring the internet for answers. The search for answers. When they reached out to the authorities, they were met with skepticism. The abandoned military facility had been mysteriously cleared by the time an investigation team arrived. No traces of the lab, the ape-man, or any experiments remained. Determined, Rodrigo began his own investigation, collecting reports of other strange sightings in the area, the fear of the unknown. At night, the family gathered in the living room, lights on, unable to bear being alone. The fear extended beyond the ape-man to what it symbolized: human arrogance, unethical science, and dark secrets hidden in the world's shadows. Lingering doubts. Despite witnessing the creature's fall, doubt lingered. Was it really dead? Were there others like it? Every odd noise and shadow reignited their terror, the legacy of horror. The Mendez family was forever changed, burdened with the knowledge that the world is far more vast, strange, and dangerous than they'd imagined. As they tried to rebuild their lives, a dark certainty hung over them. Some horrors, once awakened, never fully returned to slumber. Somewhere in the depths of those foggy forests, more secrets waited to be uncovered. The nightmare may have ended, but its echoes would haunt their lives, a constant reminder of the thin line between man and monster. The Mendez family's story is just one thread in the dark web that permeates our world. In every remote corner, behind peaceful fields and isolated cabins, ancestral secrets challenge reality itself. The horror they faced may have been contained, but its echoes reverberate through the fabric of our universe, waiting to be heard by those willing to listen. Rodrigo, Marina, Lucas, and Julia carry the physical and emotional scars of an experience that changed them forever. The image of the ape-man, with its glowing yellow eyes, is a constant reminder that there are horrors beyond human comprehension, lurking in the shadows. Stay tuned for the next tale from Draven Nocturnus, where new familial curses, demonic pacts, and unimaginable horrors await those brave or foolish enough to unravel them. Remember, sometimes the true terror is not locked in a forbidden basement, but hidden within ourselves. Until the next night of nightmares, when the shadows lengthen again, and the whispers from beyond find new ears to torment.